Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to join such an esteemed group of community leaders for such a special evening as we recognize two tremendous leaders in our country, two of my colleagues at this very special award dinner. I want to thank you, Clyde, for that introduction, and I want to thank my friend and colleague Emmanuel Cleaver for letting a Jayhawk come across the state line tonight, all right? He usually tries to make me carry his bags on the airplane. He's got seniority. He was just trying to tell me he gets to speak first. So for once, just give me a chance here, all right? Well, it's an honor to join you all. In particular, tonight I'm going to speak about my friend and colleague, John Lewis. John Lewis has been called an icon, a hero. He's been called courageous, brave, tough, strong. He's been called inspirational, a pioneer. And he's all that. And he's much more. He's humble, he's kind, and he's generous. He's my colleague in Washington, D.C., and he's my friend. He's the kind of person who calls the people he sees on the House floor brother or sister, which, as you know, with the state of Congress, is a pretty generous thing to say. He's unwavering in his commitment to civil rights and to justice for all. And he will go down in history as one of the most influential people of the 21st century. A few months ago, it was said in this country that John Lewis was all talk. Well, that talk at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday in 1965, as protesters were beaten and injured, as John Lewis's head was cracked open, as he joined Martin Luther King arm in arm and marched for civil rights, well, that talk changed the course of history and the course of humanity forever. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to join my colleagues in traveling to Selma, Alabama for the 50th anniversary of the marches. John Lewis welcomed me with open arms, as he always does. We made that march together again, along with members of Congress, with presidents past and present, and we sent a strong message to the country that what he fought for in the 1960s endures today. John Lewis shows all of us kindness that day, like he does every day when I see him in Washington, D.C. He even endures requests for photos when constituents of mine ask him, and I've always appreciated that, John. So tonight we're here to see an institute that was named after the president who desegregated the United States Armed Forces in 1948 present an award to someone who gave the keynote address at the march in Washington, D.C. in 1963 and has served as Georgia's 5th district since 1986. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone more deserving of an award titled Legacy of Leadership. Harry Truman was once quoted as saying, "I never forgot who I was, where I came from, or where I'd go back to." I try to keep those words in mind myself when I travel to Washington, D.C. each week, and I represent my community in Kansas. And I know that John Lewis keeps that spirit and those words in mind and alive as well. So please join me in giving this year's Harry Truman Legacy of Leadership Award winner, John Lewis, a rousing Kansas City round of applause. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my senior colleague from Missouri, Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a pleasure for me to have two of my friends in our community, John Lewis and Jim Clyburn. And I think that if you were looking across the 535 members of the United States Congress, you would have a challenging, perhaps difficult time selecting two better recipients for this award. Jim Clyburn is from South Carolina, and he attended South Carolina State College. And if you know him, you would know almost automatically that he majored in history, because he will always bring up historical facts that are applicable to what's going on at the present time. He represents the 6th Congressional District, and in fact, we were there 2 weeks ago, I guess, and he hosted the members of Congressional Black Caucus in his district, and he's been there since 1993. As you know, there was redistricting required because of the Voting Rights Act, and when it was done as it should have been done, perhaps decades earlier, the districts were conducive for the election of both of these gentlemen, John Lewis and Jim Clyburn. And Jim is above and beyond what I would think to be the regular members of Congress. And that is, he walks with the respect of the entire body. He is somebody who, at times, I forget, just how significant a role he has played and is continuing to play. It came home when we were at the funeral service, the tragic funeral service of one of the 9 who were killed in the Mother Emanuel AME Church. And we were at Reverend Clemente Pinckney's funeral. And when Jim Clyburn walked in, it almost brought me to tears, because every human being who could stand stood and applauded, except me, because I had been weakened by the show of affection for Jim Clyburn. This thunderous applause for this man who'd done so much for them, not just the research and study foundation where he gives scholarships away, and he's given his alma mater much in the way of financial support over the years. He is the 3rd ranking Democrat in the United States Congress, and as the assistant leader, he is more than just a leader at our caucus meetings. He is our leader. The thing that I like about Jim Clyburn, and I think, Adam Sachs is here, and who has served on his staff, and so he would know this. John Lewis would know this as well, and that is Jim Clyburn is always Jim Clyburn. No matter where he is, no matter where you go. Polonius said to his son in Shakespeare's Hamlet, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day. Thou cannot be false to any man." That's Jim Clyburn. He is who he is at all times. And I think that's why people are so ready to follow his leadership. I think great leaders inspire others to be leaders. Commonplace leaders obsessed with creating followers. Jim Clyburn creates leaders. When I became the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, I knew from day one that I had the support of Jim Clyburn, or else I would not have become the chair. And I'm saying that, and I say it behind his back. He is a leader in an institution of leaders. And it would be my great hope that before he finds it necessary to go back to his lovely wife, permanently retired, that he would move up even 2 or 3 other notches. But I would like to just say that I have great joy in calling him a friend, Congressman Jim Clyburn of the 6th District of South Carolina. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Wesley Truman Daniels, the great-grandson of our favorite son, Harry Truman.
Hello. Usually my father does this. I know I look a lot like him, so bear with me. On behalf of the entire Truman family, I'm honored to present the award bearing my great-grandfather's name, the Harry S. Truman Legacy of Leadership Award. My great-grandfather once said that progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. Truman Legacy of Leadership Award was established to honor leaders who seize that opportunity to create lasting change. And there's no doubt that our two honorees this evening fit that description. At this time, I'd like to welcome back to the stage Clyde Wendell, along with Alex Burden, the Truman Library Institute's Executive Director. And now, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Truman family and the Truman Library Institute Board of Directors, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to present the 2017 Harry S. Truman Legacy of Leadership Award to Congressman James Clyburn and Congressman John Lewis. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Truman Library Institute Board member and Time Magazine editor-at-large, David Von Drehle, to the stage for a historic conversation.
Well, it's a tremendous honor to be sitting alongside, obviously, these two men. And a tremendous honor to be involved in recalling the legacy of Harry Truman in the area of civil rights.
This is not you.
One of our greatest supporters at the Truman Library, Susie Evans, said to me as I walked in, Harry Truman would be so proud to see you gentlemen honored in his name. If you forgive me, I want to start with a little story, and I'll try to make it very quick, about Harry Truman's civil rights activity. He had a lot on his plate when he assumed the presidency in the last months of World War II. and civil rights was not first on his list. But you both will remember this story that's been largely forgotten by American history. It started in your state of Georgia and came to its horrible climax in your state of South Carolina. A sergeant in the United States Army named Isaac Woodard, who had been decorated for courage under fire in the Pacific, had come home, mustered out of the Army, and still in his uniform, set off for home in Virginia aboard the bus. Along the way, he asked to use the restroom, and this led to an argument with the bus driver. And when they came to a stop in South Carolina, the sheriff was waiting for Sergeant Woodard. He was beaten so savagely that his eyes were crushed, and he was blind for the rest of his life. The sheriff was not charged with any crime. This won't be news to either of you. Mm-hmm. Harry Truman had his attention called to this by the NAACP, and he immediately wrote a letter to his Attorney General instructing him to open an investigation, and that quickly led to federal charges against the sheriff in this savage and unjustified beating. And again, this will be no surprise to you, the sheriff was acquitted in the Charleston Federal Courthouse. That led Harry Truman to create the first Commission on Civil Rights at the federal level since the days of Reconstruction in 1947. And they brought him a report pointing out the urgency of federal action on civil rights, finally. And he gave an important speech as he introduced the first comprehensive civil rights legislation since the days just after the Civil War in 1948. And he said, in classic Truman style, you can hear his voice in it, he spoke of justice for all Americans, and then he paused and said, and I mean all Americans. That seems like a long time ago, maybe, but Jim Clyburn, you were a school child when Sergeant Woodard was beaten. I wonder if you could talk about, was there a moment that you began to feel like your government might be on your side instead of your enemy?
Well, thank you very much, and once again, let me thank all of you for this enormous recognition. My parents had a lot of rules, but there were two rules that we were all bound by. Every morning at breakfast, we had to recite a Bible verse. And you couldn't say the same one twice. And on the day that my dad laid down the rule, he took Jesus Wept off the table. The second rule was every evening before retiring to bed, my two brothers and I had to share with my mom and dad a current event. We didn't have TV, so in order to do that, you had to read the newspapers. So every afternoon, the Sumter Daily Item, today it's a morning paper, but back then it was an afternoon paper, was delivered. And we read it. So this episode was very real to me. Isaac Woodard and all that flowed from it was very real. Now, in 1948, when Truman issued Executive Order, 9981 or something?
Got it right.
I forgot
No,
the
you
number,
haven't.
but I know the first two numbers.
99, 81, you know it.
When he issued that executive order, there are some other things going on in South Carolina that same year. You recall, the election was coming up. Strom Thurmond was very upset about the executive order. He left the party and ran for president against Truman on the states' rights ticket. So all of this I'm reading every day as an 8-year-old. And then there's some other things going on down in that same courthouse. J. Wadis Waring, a federal judge, issued a ruling mandating that black teachers and white teachers must be paid the same. All of this going on in 1948. Also in 1948, J. Wadis Waring issued a ruling that opened up the Democratic primary to blacks. All of this going on in 1948, and I'm soaking all this in. So that was my moment of knowing that things were going to change. And so 48 was a big year, and of course, in 52, when I turned 12 years old, in my religious belief, 12 years, the age of 12 is the age of responsibility. I went to an NAACP youth meeting. In that meeting, I think I went to the restroom or something, and when I came back, they told me that I was the president of the youth council. And this was when the efforts were starting in Clarendon County. Briggs v. Elliott, that led to Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. So in that 6-year period, there was this tremendous transition. And it was highlighted by Harry Truman's election to the presidency. Because I started reading this stuff, and this is what got me involved in politics. And how could this guy, this little ordinary fellow, going up against this icon, wealthy gangbuster from New York, Thomas Dewey, and he won. And that's when I said, things can change. So that 6-year period was a period of transition for me.
Congressman Lewis, you have to have a similar story, because when you came on the American scene as a young man in his early 20s, you represented hope. Where did that come from? Where did your hope come from?
Well, first of all, like Jim Clyburn, my friend, and my brother, and the other two brothers, Congressman Cleveland and Congressman Yoder, and to each and every one of you, thank you for honoring us tonight. Now, you know, I grew up in rural Alabama. I didn't grow up in a big city like Jim Clyburn. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and a man sold him 110 acres of land.
Wow.
My family still owns this land today.
All right.
So we would visit the little town of Troy, or visit Montgomery, Tuskegee. I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women. And I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, I heard a Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way. Like Jim, we're the same age. I may be a few months older, I think.
About 3 or 4 months older.
3 or 4 months.
My elder.
Yeah. But in 1948, I was 8 years old. And to hear Jim talk tonight, and everything that President Truman did and said. Even back in 1961, when I was 21 years old, we organized something from Washington, D.C. called the Freedom Ride.
Right.
Back in 1961, black people and white people couldn't be seated together on a Greyhound bus
Right.
or a Trailway bus. It was dangerous. Leaving Washington, traveling through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, we were on our way to New Orleans to test a decision of the United States Supreme Court. And I will never forget it as long as I live. A good friend, going to be speaking later. He was in Montgomery.
Calvin Trillin.
Calvin Drehle. Working for Time magazine.
That's right.
It was dangerous to be a reporter in 1961 covering the civil rights movement. It was dangerous to have a pad and a pencil,
Yes.
to have a camera. People were beaten and left bloody. And when we attempted to get off that bus, they turned on the reporters and the photographers. Then they turned on us.
And that's exactly what I wanted to talk with you about next, because it was not a straight or easy road, obviously. And you knew the danger you were going into. I think for younger people, well, for all of us on the sidelines or watching, it's hard for us to imagine, how does a man steel himself for that danger? When you went to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, I bet you knew what lay in store for you, or probably did. How do you prepare for that? How do you prepare yourself mentally and spiritually for that, to be nonviolent in response to what you know is going to be a violent attack?
Well, we prepared ourselves. We studied the way of peace. We studied the way of love. We studied the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. We have been taught never to hate, to become bitter, never to lose the sense of hope. And in the process, you may get arrested a few times. You may be beaten and left bloody or left unconscious. In Montgomery, I was hit in the head with a wind crate. And in Selma, I had a concussion on the bridge. Thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. But you keep going. That you see something that is so necessary and so right. And I said to my colleagues sometime, and to friends and members in my district, and to my brothers and sisters in the movement, that you have to be hopeful, you have to be optimistic, and keep going. Be faithful. Don't get lost in a sea of despair.
So, amen. You met him about that time, didn't you? In the early
1960.
1960.
John and I met October 1960.
And the 60s were a hard time. You were at Orangeburg for
Yeah.
the massacre in 1968. A lot of African Americans there were moments when there were questions about this nonviolent strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever have your doubts about your friend?
Oh,
John?
yes.
And-
Yes, I had tremendous doubts as to whether or not that was a way to effect change. But as John said, we studied. A lot of people think that all of this stuff was spontaneous. No. In fact, the original date for the Greensboro sit-in was like October of 1960. It was supposed to be before October 59.
Wow.
But it was decided that if any momentum were developed, it would get lost when the kids went home for the Christmas holidays. So it was postponed until after we returned. So that's how it became February 1, 1960. We did a lot of planning, we did a lot of studying, And we, as John said, we adopted this tactic. And quite frankly, I guess most of us doubted it. If you saw the movie Selma, you remember there's a point in the movie where John, the character, well, the guy playing John, was all for following Dr. King.
Yeah.
Now, James Foreman, the guy playing James Foreman, and quite frankly, John knows this, back then James Foreman was my closest friend in that effort. Foreman was not for it. And that kind of debate took place all the time within the movement. And people thought that all of us were on one accord. We presented ourselves out to the public, but we were always arguing as to what best to do. In fact, the weekend we met, 1960, was also the weekend I met Martin Luther King Jr. because of some divisions. So King came to Morehouse College in Atlanta to referee. And we left there, if you recall, is when King went to jail after that. And his going to jail solidified that movement. We were always questioning whether or not we were doing the right thing. But when I went to jail in 1960, just before John and I met, March 1960, I'll always remember the date, March 15, because I met my wife that day in jail. We didn't have a co-ed jail. She came to bring food to those of us who had been locked up. We went to jail around 10 o'clock in the morning and had nothing to eat all day. And she came with a hamburger. And I walked toward her thinking she was going to give me the hamburger. She pulled it back, broke it in half, and gave me half of it. She ate the other half. I was so grateful for the half hamburger. I married her 18 months later. And it's still working.
It's
still working. Yeah. We're getting ready. If all goes well, between now and June 24th, we'll celebrate our 56th wedding anniversary.
Yeah, brother.
Well, but she never accepted, my wife never accepted nonviolence. I mean, she stepped back, but she didn't feel that she could take that.
As I stated earlier, my mother, my father, and grandparents kept saying, don't get in trouble. Don't get in trouble. But the teaching of the way of peace and love, the philosophy of nonviolence, and meeting Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time in 1958. I met Rosa Parks in 1957 when I was 17. It inspired me to get in trouble. And I've been getting in trouble ever since.
Thank God. Thank God for that.
What I call good trouble. Jim, the first time I got arrested, the very first time I got arrested, I felt free. I felt liberated. I heard that we may be arrested, we may go to jail. So I wanted to look clean. Those students, young people talk about looking clean. I wanted to look fresh. I wanted to look sharp. I had very little money. I was a student in Nashville.
Yeah.
I went to a used men's store and bought a used suit, and a vest came with it. 89 students from Vanderbilt, Peabody College, Fisk University, Tennessee State, American Baptist, and Mahara Medical School, all arrested. And I tell young students today, if I still had that suit, I probably could sell it on eBay for a lot of money.
Oh, man. Standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with Martin Luther King Jr. delivering the speech is the closest thing to being at Gettysburg when Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. You were there. Did you know what you were hearing when you heard it? Did you know this is going to be one of the great speeches in all of world history?
Well, I had heard Dr. King speak
Many times.
Many times. But I think on that day, August 28, 1963, he was deeply inspired and moved. He had the ability or the capacity to turn the marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial into a modern-day pulpit. Yeah. And he preached. He really did. That was an unbelievable message to America and to the world. So when you travel across and around America, around the world, people know I have a dream.
They do.
A dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And we're still trying to fulfill that dream.
That's
Make it
exactly
real.
right. I think folks would like to hear, given what's going on in Washington, are you hopeful about America coming together around agenda items? If so, what are they?
Well, I'll let Jim, he's in the leadership.
If we're coming together, he's going to be part of it.
Where's Emmanuel when I need him? Well, let me tell you this. I think that one of the big mistakes that we make when we look at our society is to think that things move on a linear plane. They don't. This country has always gone right for a while, back left for a while, back right for a while, like a pendulum on the clock. And I tell people, in fact, I was down near Sun City last night at First Presbyterian Church, and someone asked a question like that, and she was very disappointed and fearful. And I said to us, now look, we went left in 2008, we went right last year, and already you can tell from what's going on out in the hinterlands, things are going back left again. And we must always remember that when the pendulum goes from left to right, it passes through the center. When it goes from right back left, it passes through the center. So we spend twice as much time in the center than we do on the left or the right. So I figure that's the stabilizing force. Sometimes right of center, left of center, go left, back right. So I am not frightful. I am disappointed, but I'm not frightful. But I get disappointed daily about other stuff. So you can get over disappointments. Keep the faith, as John loves to say. Stay the course. I think things are going to be okay, but you can't sit back and wait. My father was a minister. He used to tell us all the time, son, pray every day. Pray for good health and strength. Then get up off your knees and work like hell. And so we got to work.
During the 60s, I got arrested a few times. And this young man stayed of South Carolina, little town of Rock Hill.
Yep.
During the Freedom Ride. My seatmate was a young white gentleman from Connecticut. We got off the bus. We tried to enter a so-called white waiting room. We were jumped by members of the Klan. We were left lying in a pool of blood. The local police officials came up wanting to know whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. Now this is May 1961. In February of '09, one of the guys that beat us and left us bloody came to my office in Washington. He was in his 70s, with his son in his 40s. He said, "Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the people that beat you." He went around talking to local reporters, and they told him when he could locate me. And a reporter from the Rock Hill paper came with him. And the guy said, "Mr. Lewis, will you forgive me? I want to apologize. Will you accept my apology?" His son started crying. He started crying. They hugged me. I hugged them back. And I saw the gentleman for the time. We became friends. I believe in the ability of us to get it right. I believe that we can redeem America and create the beloved community and lay down the burden of race.
Amen.
And I truly believe in my guts that we would get there. We would get there. And if we get there, America will emerge as an example for the rest of the world. But it's going to be our children, our young people that lead us there and take us there.
Well, I'm not going to try to follow that, except to say that, wow, you guys were even better than I thought was going to be possible. Wow. It's an honor to have you with us. Let's go ahead and have dinner. We've got a great after-dinner speaker, one of my heroes as a journalist, Calvin Trillin, one of the best I've ever read. As you go through dinner, you might want to look at the membership materials that are at your tables. You might be moved by what we've just heard to become members of the Truman Library Institute and keep the legacy of this great man alive. Gentlemen, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.